Now let's dive back into our app.js file here. And for this, I'll also switch back to app.js here in index.html. We did now learn a lot about values, variables, functions, parameters, return values, and all these important concepts which you encounter all the time in JavaScript development. To come to an end in this section and lay a solid foundation for the upcoming sections, where we are going to dive deeper, I want to talk about another area where we can use functions. Remember objects? Of course you do. We used them in the exercise a few minutes ago. In objects, up to this point, we grouped together variables, if you want to call it like this. We have related values grouped together into an object, and we have labels to then identify these values. Now, it is also not uncommon that you don't just want to have values like that in an object, but that you also want to have functions inside of an object. So just as you can basically put variables into an object, you can also put functions into that object. And that makes sense if a certain function contains code that works together with the values in that object, or that logically belongs to this kind of object. And to give you an example, I'll add a brand new object down there, and I will name it person. And we create it as we learned it with curly braces. And now we could add different label value pairs, for example, for storing a name of that person like Max. But I want to focus on adding a function here. And adding a function here works like this. We could add a greet function, where this person then says hello to us, like this. So basically, as we define a function, we also add a name, parentheses, maybe with parameters if we need them, and then the curly braces. And we do the same here. The only difference is that we don't have the function keyword, just as we don't have the let keyword in front of our properties. So it's basically the same, just for a function. We could accept parameters here, but we could also say that this is a very simple function, which then just says hello by using the built-in alert command. That's how we could add such a function to an object. And if we add a function to an object, we typically call that a method. So a function in an object is called a method, just as a variable in an object is called a property. So here we call this a property, we call this a method. But it technically still is a function, of course. And here we now again also see an example for a function or a method that does not take any parameters and that does not return anything. Because for this function and the kind of operation it's performing, we don't need to return anything. Just executing another function is all we need here. And in that case, it's perfectly fine to define a function like this without return value and without parameters. No matter if it's a method or not, you can write functions without parameters and or without return values. But now the question is, how do we execute this function in this object? We don't execute it like this. That would be the function name, but just as you can't access the property like this, you also can't access a function just like this. That won't work. Instead, we do access a function in an object, so a method, just as we access other values in an object. By using that dot notation, we can access the object name, person, and then a dot, and then in here we have this greet method. And we see the difference between properties and methods here in this suggestions pop-up. Properties have this blue box, methods have this purple box, which is shaped differently. But then we still execute it as we learned it, so by using its name and adding parentheses thereafter. And if this function would need any parameters, we could still pass the parameter values here between these parentheses. But here we don't need that. And with this, if we save that and I reload, I still get my old boxes, and then I get this hello box, which is coming from inside my method. And that is something which we'll also need a little bit later in the course, but most importantly, something which we will use indirectly on certain built-in objects. And in the next lecture, I'll explain what I mean with that.